I'm Francis Dearnley, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, as Putin updates the world about his plans for the Kharkiv offensive, we discuss Ukraine's huge drone attack on Russian naval bases overnight. Plus, we hear from distinguished Ukrainian journalist Illia Ponomarenko, and hear an update on demining battlefields.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
If we give President Zelensky the tools, the Ukrainians will finish the job. Slava Ukraini!
Nobody's gonna break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
Every weekday, we sit down with leading journalists from the Telegraph's London newsroom and our teams reporting on the ground to bring you the latest news and analysis on the war in Ukraine. It's Friday, the 17th of May, 2 years and 84 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today I'm joined by our Associate Editor of Defence, Dominic Nicholls, co-founder of the Kyiv Independent, Illia Ponomarenko, and James Cowan from the Halo Trust. I started by asking Dom, as ever, for the latest news from the battlefields in Ukraine.
Well, thanks, Francis. Hi, everybody. So first, let's go to Kharkiv, where a 16-hour-long air raid alert across the region was finally lifted early this morning. Officials reported Russian drone strikes and a missile warning for the city of Kharkiv. Regional governor there, Oleh Symonov, said at least 5 drones had hit the city. Just hold that figure in your head for a moment. The mayor, Ihor Terekov, said the city's Osnovyansky district had been hit, with fires triggered there. No immediate word on casualties or damage. We don't know how much of this was drones, missiles or glide bombs because elsewhere, maybe the fog of war, but Ukrainian officials in the general staff said it had shot down all 20 drones Russia fired last night, which obviously doesn't chime with something hit Kharkiv, and they say 5 drones were seen there. So we don't know what the ordnance was. However, the Ukrainian military said this morning that there were drones and other air munitions shot down over the regions of Kharkiv, Poltava, Vinnytsia, Odessa and Mykolaiv. The governors of Poltava and Mykolaiv regions said no casualties had been caused in their areas. I've not seen any other reporting from the other regions that were targeted. Also speaking this morning, Ukraine's army chief Alexander Syrsky said Russia had launched the offensive north of Kharkiv to force Ukraine to throw additional reserve brigades into the fighting there. He said he expected fighting to intensify as Kyiv's troops are also preparing to defend the northern region of Sumy. That's to the northwest of Kharkiv, up in the sort of bordering up the sort of Belarus, Russia border and that way. Now, possibly contradicting the boss as a day for that, Ukrainian officials say the tempo of the Russian offensive operations in the Kharkiv area continues to decrease. But they have repeated their warnings, which, to be fair, they've been saying since the Kharkiv offensive started last Friday, that they expect Russia to launch an assault on Sumy as soon as the situation in Kharkiv has stabilised, which it now looks like it has. Indeed, President Zelensky said today that Russian forces were able to advance as far as 6 miles deep during their offensive in the Kharkiv area, but that the situation had stabilised. He used the word stabilised. He said Moscow's forces were halted by Ukraine's first line of defence. Again, day of contradictions. That slightly contradicts some of the reports we've had from troops on the ground. I'd just say we should be really cautious here. War is always confusing. Troops often only able to really accurately report as far as they can see. Plus, if you've just been under heavy bombardment and had 30,000 Russians turn up on your doorstep, you're going to be slightly shocked. Their judgment might be out of kilter. So we pass you the information so you can try and make sense of all the different things you'll hear. We're not trying to confuse you, but you will hear differing reports. It's not disinformation. I think it's the fog of war. Now, it appears Russia massed about 30,000 troops on their side of the border before the push into the north last week. But it seems like they've committed fewer than 10,000. I've seen some estimates down to about 5,000. President Zelensky said Russian forces did not reach any concrete fortifications, which suggests it wasn't a massively well-resourced offensive in terms of Russian ground forces. But it does call into question, well, what were the defences up there? We don't know. More will come out in the coming weeks, I'm sure. Elsewhere, Ukrainian drones struck military bases and oil facilities overnight in one of Kyiv's largest attacks of the war so far. First, in Ukraine, the Russian-controlled part of Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula was hit by something. We're not exactly sure. It suffered what was described as a partial blackout after debris from downed drones fell on an electrical substation. This comes from the city's Russia-installed governor, Mikhail Razvozyev. Now, staying in Ukraine, and it looks like the Russian Belbek air base just north of Sevastopol in Crimea has been hit by ATACMS for the last couple of nights, on the overnight 15th, 16th. Something we mentioned yesterday. Satellite imagery of the Belbek air base shows 3 destroyed Russian jets and a destroyed fuel storage facility. I have seen reports, unverified, but from trusted sources, that the destroyed aircraft were 2 MiG-31s and 1 Su-27, with a MiG-29 also damaged. A hat tip here to Christian Trebert, who's at the visual investigations team at the New York Times for that. He says a fuel storage near the main airbase runway was also destroyed. Then into Russia, the naval port of Novorossiysk was hit. Now that's where Russia's Black Sea fleet has relocated to from Ukraine, from Sevastopol, under threat of Ukraine missile strikes and drones. Novorossiysk is about 100 k's southeast of the Kerch Bridge on the Russian Black Sea coast. Now, continue down the coast for about another 100 kilometres, you get to the town of Tuapse. 2 drones hit an oil refinery there, sparking a large fire. You'll find images online. Have a look at Rob Lee's feed. You'll see some stuff there. It shows relatively slow-moving drones in daylight flying into their targets, totally unimpeded. So what air defence doing is the question. Further north into Russia, in Belgorod Oblast, that borders Ukraine to the north. The regional governor there, Vyacheslav Gladkov, said another drone attack had struck a family driving near the border, killing a mother and her 4-year-old son. That is, of course, terrible. But I ask the trolls listening in to tell me if that was terrorism. Elsewhere, next to no movement up and down the line, Russian forces continue to try to push into Chasiv Yar and keep the pressure on around Avdiivka, but there's been no significant movement at all elsewhere in the line. And that's us up to date, Francis.
Well, thank you very much, Dom. And just to say to listeners, Roland and Joe have written for The Telegraph the best summary I've seen anywhere on the new Kharkiv offensive, with detailed maps, graphics and footage. So if you're finding it tricky to visualise the front lines, we highly recommend it, and we'll add a link in the description. There does appear to be genuine alarm among some Western governments, though perhaps not enough in response to the Russian assault. This whole episode is arguably evidence of the folly of the stalemate narrative, as it suggested that Kyiv had enough to keep the lines fixed before they began their own offensives. As such, Western governments, hiding behind that delay of the $60 billion aid package in the US, were not truly incentivised to do more to arm Ukraine in this critical phase. Listeners will, of course, have heard the German ambassador to Britain on the podcast a couple of days ago. And whilst we heard the predictable refrain about the dangers of escalation when we put to him the urgency of the situation and the need to do more, it is important to mark the fact that Germany is evidently beginning to show signs of open discord and disagreement on this issue, with the more hawkish politicians in Berlin on resignation watch over the failures of Chancellor Olaf Scholz to do more, as James Rothwell spoke about in detail in yesterday's episode. The German foreign minister indeed today described the situation around Kharkiv as highly dramatic, saying that it was important Kyiv got more long-range weapons to cut off Russian supply routes and give Ukraine weapons that can be used over medium and long distances. That's a direct quote. Baerbock said that Germany is working with other partners on the issue of long-range weapons, but said that overall it is, quote, an extremely difficult situation. Now, it's interesting, too, to see how Putin is seeking to portray this offensive to Russia's domestic audience and, by extension, the world. He's claimed Moscow has no plans to capture Kharkiv and that the ground assault into the region was intended merely to stop Ukrainian cross-border shelling. Now, it may be true that Russia is trying to stop that shelling, but just listen to the precise wording here. Quote, as for what is happening on the Kharkiv front, this is their fault, because they have shelled and continue to shell residential neighbourhoods in border areas, including Belgorod. Putin was speaking to Russian reporters, of course, on his visit to China. He then added, "We are seeking to create a buffer zone to protect Russian border regions." Now, this narrative that in a sense this is merely a defensive battle and, of course, war has not proven ineffective. I was chatting to someone only the other day who does not follow this conflict closely, who believed that Russia's invasion was merely a response to Ukrainian aggression, when really that narrative, I would argue, should now lie in the dust ever since Putin began comparing himself to Peter the Great, and the relative lack of his speaking about NATO encroachment, that narrative we often heard at the beginning of the war, when Finland and Sweden joined the alliance. There's been almost no response, really, relatively speaking, to what has happened with that supposed encroachment. Now, I was mocked yesterday for my tuxedo in the office for an after-work dinner, though I would say that at least I wear a suit in the office, Dom, in contrast to some people who shan't be named. But it was a very interesting dinner, which is why I mention it here, with many former military types and spooks in attendance. Miss Lysia Vasilenko, MP from Ukraine, also spoke, as did Mr. Mike Longstaff, a long-time listener to the podcast. So, hi, Mike. And also the Earl of Oxford, who used to be a very senior figure in our intelligence services here. It was he and his wife who smuggled the KGB double agent Oleg Gordievsky out in the boot of his car. He was MI6 station commander in Moscow at the time. And he, in his remarks, emphasised that anyone who thinks Russia will stop with its current conquests, even in the event of a ceasefire or temporary peace, is sorely mistaken. So straight from somebody who knows Russia arguably more than almost anybody. Now, the longer this war goes on, the more it is changing the world we inhabit. India's growth in trade with Russia should not be seen as a temporary phenomenon now, according to India's foreign minister today, as New Delhi has emerged as one of the top buyers of Russian seaborne oil since Western nations imposed sanctions and halted purchases in response to the war. For long, we have looked at Russia from a political or security perspective, he told Reuters. But now we see new opportunities. As the country turns eastwards, fresh economic opportunities are presenting themselves. The spike in our trade and new areas of cooperation should not be regarded as temporary. Now, just to remind listeners, trade between India and Russia stood at $65.7 billion in the financial year ending March 2024. That's a 33% jump over the previous year. This is all a consequence of the war, and nations like India who've decided not to follow the sanctions protocols against Moscow, and they are, as a result, benefiting enormously. We hope, of course, to return to India in a future episode. Now, we've got two guests lined up for the podcast today, and I'm just trying to get them to join. So just while I do that, Dom, any reflections from you on any of what I've reported on today? Because, of course, when we're looking at the Kharkiv offensive and Putin's remarks, it is interesting, isn't it, to see the way that he is portraying this. But surely you as a military man will know that the key to unlocking that front from Putin's perspective is to take Kharkiv, whatever he might say.
Well, I mean, he says a lot of things. He's trying to give himself enough wiggle room because he's seen over the last 2.5 years how his amazing 3-week plan has gone to ashes. So he's got to try and pretend it's all things to everybody. He's got to say that this is only a border, a buffer zone. And then if there's a sudden breakthrough, he'll say, it was a diversion all along. I mean, it clearly is going for Kharkiv, the second city, for all the political power that would give him, as well as societal, military, etc., etc. And anything short of that, I'll say, we're not really trying that hard. Of course, it's all nonsense. He still has never relinquished his maximalist aims of trying to take the whole of Ukraine. So there's no way he's going to start now. I mean, he's in a bit of a bind. The military here is exhausted. The army he started with has gone, and he's now down to conscripts and pressed men, basically. He's had to go cap in hand to China this week. He's turned his country into a massive gas station, basically, for China and India. So he's not in a great place. All he has is mass, and he's willing to use it, as we've seen. So the tactics up north, even if this was just to create a buffer zone, they've not achieved it. They've put pressure on, of course, and you always want to pressure your enemy, but they've not actually achieved much. I mean, they've not got as far as Ukraine did in its counter-offensive last year, and everyone says, "Oh, what a complete disaster that was," and yet somehow we're supposed to think that this is an enormous, hugely successful and very strategic breakthrough in the north. So it is what it is. They've tried to push into the north. They will continue to try again. They are looking for weak points in Ukraine's line. They've not got a lot of sophisticated equipment. They are still got a lifeline from China for the microelectronics, and hence they're able to convert these glide bombers and so on and so forth. But on the ground, they haven't got a lot of ground taking and ground holding capability. And that's ultimately what this comes down to. War is ultimately settled on the ground. Is who owns the power bases, who has literally the bits of ground where the political base and society is. Of course, air power, maritime, space, cyber, all the rest of it, they all play a part. But ultimately it comes down to who owns the real estate. And we've seen that for all their glide bombs and being able to mass troops in their country without fear of ATACMS and HIMARS and what have you coming at them, they can't actually do an awful lot on the ground. Russia is very lucky that Ukraine also is exhausted and can't do much at the moment. Ukraine is a bit lucky as well that Russia, this army, is not very good. So there's a lot of pushing and pulling at the moment. We can read too much into it. I really wouldn't listen to what Putin's saying, well, except as a bit of an indicator about what he doesn't want us to look at. There are some big things to look at here more broadly. The biggest one of those, I think, Putin's appointment last week of an economist as his defence minister, as we've spoken about before. But on the ground, it is very, very tense, but pretty equal, I would say.
Thanks, Dom. Now, I'm delighted to welcome someone to the podcast who will be very well known to many listeners for his huge social media following, Illia Ponomarenko, the Ukrainian journalist known as the former defence and security reporter at the Kyiv Post and subsequently co-founder of the Kyiv Independent. He's covered the war in eastern Ukraine since the conflict's earliest days, as well as Russia's full-scale invasion. And he's just written an account about his reporting from the battle for Kyiv in 2022 called I Will Show You How It Was. We're very pleased to have Illia joining us today. Illia, welcome. You've gained a massive social media following as you've chronicled the early days of the war. Tell us about your memories of 2022.
Oh, that's a tough question, because reporting about the Battle of Kyiv from inside the battle was about so many things, emotionally, materially, historically too, about the profession, about events, and about yourself, because that was about ourselves too, as Ukrainians living in Ukraine and wishing to live in Ukraine. I got back to Kyiv in the first days following the Russian invasion because I had to take care of my mom. So I took her to my girlfriend's parents' house in Western Ukraine, and I got back with my friend, who was the driver. And I must say that I got back to Kyiv that was half-empty ghost town, nasty, dark, finally silent. The silence was the worst, especially in the first nights of our stay in Kyiv. The silence so empty, so frightening that inside your apartment in the night you could feel as if you're in the middle of a spacecraft, just in the middle of a galaxy, and there's nothing between the vacuum of space and you inside your apartment. That was, I would say, the worst thing that you personally experience as you live in the city under attack. And there's what I remember very vividly from that time is that on the first days, you don't want to eat, you don't want to sleep, you don't want to put TV on or watch a movie or listen to music. All you really want as you get back to the apartment after a day in the field with the military or after a day in the city trying to find stories and working, all you want to do is just sit in the dark and maybe scroll through the news and check in with everything that's happening. Because me and my flatmate, we lived the very extreme outskirts, northwest of Kyiv. And basically what's happening with Russian invasion and Russian attack in this triangle, Bucha, Hostomel, Irpin, happened just several kilometers away from us. So we could hear everything that was happening every single night with all the fighting. But at the same time, it's about professional work as a journalist. It's something that we did for years before that in Donbass and beyond and many other wars outside of Ukraine. But it's about your backyard, your own city, your own town, and it's about your life. So you had to concentrate on professional and also on personal things, apart from bits of survival like having a food stack, having a plan of what you have to do if Russians break through and enter our neighborhood. So we had to have some sort of an emergency plan for this. At the same time, there was this emotional seesaw because with the days, it became more and more evident and clear that the invasion plan for Russians had failed. It definitely was going wrong. The plan of a quick jump into Kyiv and taking Ukraine surprised and paralyzed and demoralized is definitely not going well. So I would say that after March 8th, maybe, when there was a first relative lull in hostilities around Kyiv, I really started realizing that we are winning this battle. So I would say that by the mid-March, I would say, by the time the Battle of Mashun was peaked, I think there was more of hope and joy and sudden outbursts of enthusiasm about this when it comes to myself and when it comes to people that I know around myself. So that was a lot of emotional seesaw, but a lot of pretty nasty things, I would say. And the outcome of the battle, I remember the moment on March 29th, when we, the guys with the Kyiv Independent, those who were in the city, we were at the bar, illegally working bar, next to so many people from media world. And just out of the blue, you see this news on your smartphone saying that Russians have decided to scale down their hostilities near Kyiv, Chernihiv, and Sumy, which essentially meant that they are leaving. And that was so historically significant, but it came really usual in this. So, yeah, that was a very weird time in so many aspects.
Well, you mentioned the historical significance of it there, and I imagine that you felt that you were recording history as it was unfolding. I just wanted to ask a question about that very fact, actually, which is you've written a memoir, in essence, about that time. The war, of course, is still ongoing. So why now? It's a phenomena, isn't it, of course, of people quite often writing war memoirs long after the fact. Why did you feel it was so important to publish this now?
Actually, you, as an author, you have little to no control over when your book is published. I started writing this book around the peak of the Battle of Bakhmut. It's late 2022. And essentially, it was completed more than a year ago. And when it comes to working with large publishers, it takes you about a year to get your book published from the point of being a manuscript, completed manuscript, to actually hitting the stores. And I decided to write the book back in those days when the situation was pretty different, because the entire story of this transition to war from, let's say, October 2021 to the invasion and the outcome of invasion, it was so deep inside my mind for so many months after. It was such a monumental event that I witnessed that touched so deeply upon my heart and surprised me so that I just couldn't help but write this, because, let's recall the final weeks or even months before the invasion. Half of the world burned us alive, just arguing how soon would Kyiv fall. Is it 72 hours? Is it 48 hours or so? I remember you could call this atmosphere of absolute doom, of Ukraine having little to no chance. And at the same time, what happened as bombs fell and when the battle started, my people showed so much defiance, so much enthusiasm, unity, hope, that essentially in the atmosphere of pretty much everybody understanding that this might be the end of us all and the end of the Ukrainian nation as we know it, and the end of lives. And in that situation, there was so many people who were doing what they have to do. The military was heroically fighting. And I remember those moments from Bucha, from outskirts of Kiev, from Irpin, this absolute defiance, this heroism. It was so unbelievable. And what's most importantly, this absolute defiance of death and preemptive Russian victory, it worked out. It essentially broke this paradigm of inability of Ukraine to win this war. It broke this predestined set of history, and history essentially because of this changed its course on those days around Kyiv. So up until now, I seriously consider the Battle of Kyiv the pivotal moment for modern history and for this conflict, because Russians, essentially, as we know it, they wanted a quick jump on Kyiv. They never wanted a long war as we have it, thus this special military operation. And from the defeat of Kyiv, essentially the entire plan just got derailed. And we are where we are right now. In many ways, the Battle of Kyiv and the victory gave us the chance to go on in a much longer war, but it's been a chance that we still use it. We still have the consequences of that uneven and very unscripted success. But I would say that it's a bit of a divine intervention, maybe, that this book comes out in this day and age when things are far from being really good for us here in Ukraine. And I think it just came to be that my main message in this book is that we need to have hope. We need to do what we have to do. We need to remember what it's all about. And this is the way to the success. No matter how dark it is, there is always a way to go. There is always hope and always something like this. Just like what we had in the Battle of Kyiv, when half of the world was burning us alive, but nonetheless, we managed to do this. This is my message.
Well, I'm going to ask you in a second about the direction of travel of the war from your perspective. But just first, of course, further to chronicling the battle for Kyiv, you were also one of the founders of the Kyiv Independent, an outlet of which we have many, many dealings and often have reporters on talking about the conflict and also at the moment in Georgia. What were the challenges of that and the rewards of it? Because I imagine it was not an easy thing to do at a time of war.
Yeah, essentially, Kyiv Independent was born in November 2021, just several months before the invasion, and when we were in the middle of this war crisis between Russia and Ukraine. And the Kyiv Post was basically incepted 3, maybe 4 days after we were all fired from the Kyiv Post. And at some point when this happened, we just decided that we can't leave our country, our media space, without a honest, a professional English language media outlet, especially in the time when we are openly talking about the possibility of a large war with Russia. So that was, of course, a major challenging thing because we had no money at all. We had nothing of what a media team should have as it launches a brand new media outlet. But at the same time, we had a lot of attention to Ukraine because it doesn't happen every day that Russia actually almost openly, in great defiance, threatens war and concentrates the largest military force since the Cold War against Ukraine. At the same time, we had a lot of public support inside Ukraine because the dismissal of the Kyiv Post team, the conflict with the owner, was a massive scandal here in Ukraine. And it had a lot of attention outside of Ukraine. I remember days of the inception of the Kyiv Independent, and we had to give sometimes 2-3 interviews each and every day, all of us, to so many world media outlets, asking us questions about what happened, what really happened. Why did the owner decide to get rid of you? And what are you doing next? There was a lot of support from very regular people, like those who immediately became our patrons, who sent donations on GoFundMe. I think at some point, we reached the point of having close to £1 million on our GoFundMe account. And we would get messages from people like lawyers who wanted to help us with all the legal things pro bono. Or we have a chain of co-working spaces here in Kyiv. It's called Be Working. And the guy simply sends me a message on Facebook saying that, guys, if you need an office space, you got it. No money, nothing. Just be my guest. So there was really a lot of support, and many embassies also answered the call and helped us, if not with some small grants, but with lots of political support, issuing statements and stuff like that. It really helped a lot. And I'm not going to deny that this dire crisis that Ukraine was a really challenging thing to cover because you have to work from cafes, from co-working spaces, but at the same time there was a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of understanding of your mission and your duty as journalists. So I'm pretty proud of the way we covered this terrible crisis with a lot of emotional pressure upon us too. But at the same time, we managed to stay professional and stay focused. And we managed to keep this torch of being the leading English language media outlet, Ukrainians from Ukraine, talking about Ukraine for the world audience. Not only Ukrainians, but also a lot of foreign guys working here, but still living in Ukraine, knowing a lot about Ukraine. So that was something that shapes you as a huge professional in a super challenging environment, especially when it comes to moments like when you have to go on working, writing stories, producing videos, a lot of things like that. At the same time, you have to have plans on what do we do if the worst comes? Do we leave the town? Do we have enough food? Do we have connections? What do we do if we lose each other? How do we stay online? We need to use our friends in the United States, for instance, to keep the website updated about all the events. So this is one of those things that shape you as a huge professional. The harder it is, the better you are after all these things.
Thank you. And then my question about the future of the war. You're somebody who's seen so much of it up close. What do you think the direction of travel is at the moment? How concerned are you about the assaults on Kharkiv? Do you fear a Russian breakthrough, or do you think that the lines will be held?
It's a kind of war that is so hard to predict because, again, let's get back in our memories to what we had 2.5 years ago. Did anyone expect that Russia would be defeated at Kyiv? Did anyone expect that the blitzkrieg, that Russia would essentially fail? Did anyone expect Russians to lose Kherson or the Ukrainian jump on Kharkiv Oblast? So it's something that is really hard to predict. This war is so full of surprises. But I think given the pace of this war and given the logic of events and many other factors outside and inside Ukraine, I think the most realistic scenario for the next a year or so maybe is that at some point we come to a moment when Russians finally realize that their ability to fund this war from so many perspectives, money, resources, military production, is not sufficient for a truly 100% successful designed by Vladimir Putin's Russia and the Russian elite, which is the complete occupation of entire Ukraine. At the same time, they will see that their plans of making West completely abandon Ukraine does not come true, is not happening. And they're clearly having a hard time in terms of keeping this war at the pace that they want, given their dwindling Soviet supplies, given their production that reaches its peak but still does not provide enough material resources, does not provide enough means for this war to reach the 100% goal for this. At the same time, we still see that the West is not doing a very good job in terms of unfolding its own defense production, its own gargantuan potential in this. But still, the West is not giving up. We're still seeing that a lot of things are being done for Ukraine in terms of supplies, in terms of support. So I think the most realistic point is that at some point in 2025, I guess, next year, we'll start thinking about negotiations with Russia. And it would be better for us to be as strong and as prepared as possible for these negotiations, because Russians will have to agree on some sort of negotiations, or at least an attempt to, because their situation is better than what we have, but still it's not even closer to being as good as they want us to believe. No wonder that they keep talking about this. They need pause, and in hostilities, they need it. So I think that's going to be the realistic scenario. And I think we will have some sort of a frozen conflict for some time. And in the months and years after, it would depend on us and our allies in the West if we can prevent another war by being as strong as we can by building the best military power as we possibly can, by being way too strong for tempting Russia to launch another war. It will be the question of us doing our job and not doing our job if we want to prevent another war. So I think after that, we will be busy with building military defense reforms, and we will require a lot of support, a lot of help from the West if we want to prevent another war. I think that feels like it's a realistic scenario for me. When it comes to Kharkiv, I don't think that we should expect Russians breaking through to Kharkiv, and Putin said it clearly. But at the same time, to me, the details of what's happening in Kharkiv region, to Vovchansk, all the setbacks with fortifications, all the setbacks with command and control from the Ukrainian side, is just yet another wake-up call, yet another indicator that we have to do something about our corruption. We have to do a lot of things about the model of governance. We have to clear a lot of mess in our command and control system, in our government system. We have to punish a lot of people for what's happening, because a lot of people in high cabinets of Ukraine are still acting as if it's the year 2016 and there is no existential war anymore. And the quality of their decisions, the quality of their implementing these decisions, such as with this fortifications case and so many other things, is just another wake-up call and another chance for us to do a lot of things to make this country a better place and a more effective nation mechanism. So I don't think that Russians will take Kharkiv, but nonetheless is yet another indicator that things are not very good in this country.
Well, thank you, Ilya. And now it's also great to have on the podcast James Cowan, returning to our pod, CEO of the Halo Trust, an organisation which focuses on the clearance of landmines. James, it's great to have you back. What has your organisation been up to since we last heard from you?
Hello, Francis. Nice to be back. Well, Halo plays the long game. We're one of those organisations that didn't leave Afghanistan, and we have no intention of leaving Ukraine either. We recovered from the February 22 invasion. We were able to essentially grow on the 200 survivors of the pre-February invasion and reconstitute them around Kyiv. And I'm pleased to say we've grown from small beginnings of around 200 to about 1,200 staff today. And having pivoted out of the Donbass to Kyiv, we then re-expanded all the way along the north of the country. And you've just been talking about Kharkiv, and we have around 250 staff clearing landmines around Kharkiv. But essentially we're in three places: around Kyiv, around Kharkiv, and in the south around Mykolaiv and Kherson. So it's been a big success story. And of course, Ukraine doesn't just need to stay in the war, it needs to keep its economy going. And huge parts of the west of the country are largely mountainous and not particularly good arable land. But the best arable land is in the east, and it is much of this arable land that is now contaminated with landmines. So getting that land clear to help Ukraine's economy is absolutely vital.
Thank you. And the war is obviously progressing, and we're seeing a new set of challenges, I imagine, for the demining community. What things have jumped out at you in terms of being different about the way that the war in Ukraine has evolved in contrast to other wars that you've dealt with prior to now?
Well, a lot of the wars we've been involved with in the last 20 years have been interstate conflict with non-state actors. And this is obviously a state-on-state conflict, hugely industrialized, with the wholesale substitution of manpower for mine power, because landmines are a good way of holding extended defensive lines, and this is notably the case with the Russians. Of course, what's happened in this instance is that Russia has gone from being on the offensive when it didn't need landmines particularly to being in the middle part of the conflict on the defensive. And it laid the very extensive Beacon line. But much of that is out of reach to us at the moment, because now that Russia is back on the offensive again, our work is really about clearing those areas that were liberated in the very successful autumn 2022 offensives around Kharkiv and in the south. So that's where we're focused. There's a huge amount of contamination there. We're clearing literally tens of thousands of landmines, and we're going to keep going at that. But what's different, of course, is that with Russia back on the offensive, we're seeing the effects of that. And our staff around Kharkiv, well, they live in the city. It's a really difficult life. Power comes off. Essential services are hard. People are coming out to clear landmines every day, but they're worrying about their families, their children, their houses being struck. There's a fairly constant stream of drones and glide bombs onto targets around Kharkiv, and it has a very chronic effect on people's psychology over the long term. But despite that, they're sticking with it. They're incredibly courageous and hugely dedicated and determined to see the task through.
James, hi, it's Dom here. Thanks so much for joining us again. It's great to speak to you, given the circumstances. Now, you're talking there about Russia going back on the offensive, and given the pace of this war, including, and I use the term very lightly, the innovation of mine warfare, how do you keep your teams updated to the latest threats, the latest areas of mining, and how do you interact with the warring parties?
Yeah, well, we are a humanitarian organisation, therefore we're dedicated to serving anyone who is affected by war. But the reality of the situation is that it's impossible for us to operate within Russian-controlled areas. Much as we would like to, we would be happy to serve the interests of any civilian who's caught up in this, but we can't. And so we're completely 100% operating on the Ukrainian side of the line of control, and it's in Ukrainian areas that we are seeking to clear the landmines. And it is, of course, those areas where it is safe enough to do so. We hope in the fullness of time that Ukraine can get back on the offensive, and that the Surovikin line, which is this 1,000-kilometre line from the Black Sea to the Russian border, which we believe contains several million landmines, in which we're using big data, satellite-enabled number crunching to see where the mines are. This is going to be the biggest landmine challenge ever. One day we hope to get onto it, but that requires the Ukrainians to be able to take the offensive.
Thanks. I believe there are four main organisations demining in Ukraine at the moment. Is there any overarching coordination? How is the world responding to it? Is it charity? How is it all knitted together?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So wherever we work in the world, we subordinate ourselves to the National Mine Action Authority. There are many more than four organisations. There are other NGOs such as ourselves, although we're by far and away the largest. But there is also obviously the Ukrainian military, but of course their efforts are far more focused on military demining rather than humanitarian demining. And then there is the State Emergency Service. The Ukrainians are trying to encourage the commercialization of demining, but obviously what we focus on is high standards. We're not interested in $5 a day demining or low safety standards. We want to make sure we give our people the right quality of training, and we do that through a very rigorous 8-week course. So there's a multitude of small operators who are perhaps not as well trained as they should be. There is the State Emergency Service, and there are the other humanitarian operators, of whom people like Fondation Suisse Déminage, FSD, the Mines Advisory Group, the Norwegian People's Aid, and the Danish Refugee Council are examples.
Thank you. And now you mentioned it at the start, looking at your wider work, it's been over 2.5 years since the Taliban regained power in Afghanistan. What has Halo's experience been of working in the country since then, coordinating, maybe even cooperating with the Taliban? How's that looking?
Yeah, well, I'm of the view that we're not here to take political sides. We're here to help the people of any country affected. We decided as early as 2018 to pivot away from Soviet-era landmines in Afghanistan towards clearing IEDs. And that has been a hugely powerful humanitarian tool. We've cleared 6,000 IEDs during that time. Very sadly, I have to report this week, for the very first time, 2 of our staff were killed in an IED accident in Uruzgan. But we've cleared 6,000, so that is 6,000 that haven't exploded and haven't killed innocent civilians. We're going to carry on. And to your point, we're able to function with the support of the Taliban. I believe that the Taliban is not an international jihadi organization. It's fundamentally inwards-looking and interested only in Afghanistan. And yes, it is conservative, but it is also actually hostile to other jihadi organizations such as ISIS. So we're working there. We've been able to sustain 2,500 staff. And the Taliban is a relatively pragmatic organization. It's a surreal experience for me. I'm the former commander Task Force Helmand, but I'm able to go and meet former Taliban commanders. They look at me, I look at them, and we know that our interest is actually mutual. It is in preserving life in a peaceful Afghanistan. And I take a lot of pleasure in that. In a way, I'm sure many ex-soldiers are looking for some redemption from the events of the Kabul evacuation, and this is my way of doing it.
I do hope you're briefing and lecturing staff colleges and anyone else that would listen, quite frankly, because that sort of post-conflict relationship is extraordinary. I hope we hear more about it. Please let us know if there are fora you're speaking at that we can come and have a listen. And I'm very, very sorry to hear of your loss this week. Not the first in recent years at all for your organisation in Afghanistan. What is the role, if there is one, for Halo in Gaza?
Yeah, really, thank you, Dom, and thank you for your words about Afghanistan. On Gaza, we are very heavily invested in the Middle East. So we've had a program on the West Bank for a number of years. We pride ourselves on the fact that we're very adept at very careful, very patient negotiation between Israelis and Palestinians. And as a result of that, we have the trust and confidence, almost uniquely, of the Israelis and of the Palestinian Authority. We're not currently in Gaza, but we are looking very seriously at it. And I have three questions. Is there a humanitarian need? There is an enormous humanitarian need because vast amounts of unexploded ordnance is present, and people can't return home and can't start rebuilding their houses if there is unexploded ordnance. So we absolutely see a need for our work there. Second question is a harder one. Is there sufficient safety? What happened to World Central Kitchen, what's happened to some UN staff is disturbing. And as an ex-soldier, it's one thing to get an assurance from the Israelis that it's safe to operate, but I'm not yet confident that that multitude of different targeting authorities creates sufficient clarity to avoid casualties. That's before I even come on to the question of Hamas and whether they would treat us in a hostile way. I very much hope not, because we are there for Palestinians. And the third question I have is there a sufficiently broad political consensus for us coming in? And because of that unique relationship, we have the support of the Israelis and of the Palestinians on the West Bank. But we need to make sure that that confidence is extended into Gaza itself, and that we now believe we have quite a broad-ranging coalition of Palestinian NGOs and charities that want to work alongside us. So we're not going to be going in imminently, but if the conditions are correct, it is our plan so to do.
But if I could make one point, I worry that the incredibly partial nature of the debate about Gaza, people are taking positions either as extremely pro-Israel or extremely pro-Palestine. And if the world adopts such extremely polarized positions, the only people who will suffer from this are the actual people who are surviving inside of Gaza. And so I believe it's in all our duties to set aside those partial positions, either pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, and find a way to help the people who actually need it.
Finally, for me, how do you keep going? The world is more polarised. The world is getting more confrontational every day. There are more conflicts, and that means more landmines, I guess, because they are cheap, destructive, terror-inducing. Do you ever ask, what's the point?
Yes, the world is becoming more difficult. But what I'm hoping, my vision for Halo is an organisation that can play a far more central part in tackling the scourge of conflict, which is growing out of control day by day and needs organisations like us to help control it.
Well, thank you very much, James, for your time. We look forward to having an update from you another time, I'm sure, in the next few weeks. Coming up, the final thoughts from Dom and Illia, and an interview from David in Ukraine. Dom Nicholls, what are your final thoughts for today?
Yeah, thanks, Francis. Illia, lovely to hear from you. Thanks so much for your comments there. First, a little bit of an update. Breaking news. Within the last hour, Russia's ambassador to Britain, Andrei Kelin, speaking on Russia's Rossiya 24, the state TV Channel, has said earlier today, that London is a de facto participant in the Ukraine war because of the weapons it was supplying to Kyiv, and said also because London is sharing, as he describes it, as real-time intelligence. So that was an update. Hold that thought for a moment, please. My final thoughts today. I would say there are 5 reasons right now why Russia has been able to advance in the north and for a wider context. And Kyiv's on the naughty step for 2 of them, the west for the other 3. So Kyiv, first of all, fortifications. Ilya's just mentioned them. They should have been done. They should be doing more now. I say more, of course, I'm not there. I can't see these things reporting live, but people I speak to who are on the ground tell me of the slow pace of development and the poor design in fortifications. So that's just a given. That has to happen. It should have happened by now. Fine, put that behind it. It needs to happen now. Number 2, mobilisation. I really do think they need to grasp the nettle on this one. This is an existential fight. I note that in World War II, Britain didn't go to full mobilisation immediately. Of course, this is a very fine judgment, but where is the tipping point between being just right and being too late? If your country's the existential nature, the existence of your country is at stake, you can't be a minute too late. It's controversial, difficult, divisive, but I think thousands of more young people need to get into uniform fast. And I know how glib that sounds coming from a Westerner sat nowhere near this, but hey, that needs to happen. Now on to the West. Number 1, the pace of weapon pledges and deliveries. We can literally see in the north now the impact of what this foot dragging results in. So what more do you need to be shown? The pledges need to be made, they need to be honoured, and they need to be faster and bigger. Number 2, escalation. Right, the rattling of the nuclear sabre. Okay, Putin done it less so in recent months, we think, since Xi Jinping told him to be less full-throated when talking about nuclear stuff. But there are others, the occasionally sober Medvedev, he's still around, he talks about it all the time. We are self-deterring. And this idea that as soon as we, the West, enter the war, it's existential for Russia. Off we go, lads, red button nukes. Well, surely, it's rubbish anyway, but Andre Kellyan speaking today saying that Britain is a de facto participant in the war. If you really think that, Andre, then fine, let's go for it. Now, I know I don't mean to be glib when talking about nuclear weapons, but they're just playing with us. They are setting the narrative, and we are self-deterring ourselves when it comes to nuclear stuff. And then finally, we need to gear up for the long-term economic war that this is developing into. The West with 10, 15 times the economy, the cumulative economy combined compared to Russia. We're still not got it sorted out. Putin has put an economist in charge of the defence ministry. What bigger klaxon do we need to sort ourselves out? Thank you, Francis.
Well, thank you very much, Don, for your candid reflections there. Ilya, you've got the final thoughts to end the episode today.
There's one thing that I really want to say to everyone listening to this, and also to, in general, so many people who still care and who still read news about Ukraine, who still follow Ukraine, sympathize and actively help Ukraine, is what I want to say is big thank you. Because back in those days of the Battle of Kyiv, I don't think that we were sure that more than 2 years on, so many people from around the world will be still paying attention, will still care. And moreover, so many people will be still having an influence on decision makers in their own countries when it comes to Ukrainian policies. And moreover, that so many people from so many countries around the world will be coming to Ukraine and doing journalism, actively helping with assistance, joining the ranks of the Ukrainian military, helping with medical aid. I must say that it's a very good thing. It's one of the most inspiring things about this historical event, that is Russian-Ukrainian war. It's a sign of unity. To me, it's a sign, yet another reminder of the fact that there are so many good people around the world who can sympathize, who care. And of course, to a large extent, we are where we are right now here in Ukraine, thanks to so many friends who still care outside Ukraine. So huge thank you from Ukraine for this. When victory comes, this will be our common history in this.
To end today's podcast, David Knowles, currently on the ground in the country, spoke again to friend of the podcast, Ukrainian-British sports journalist Andrew Todos, about the first Football Cup final in Ukraine since the conflict began, and how football has worked with the armed forces. This is their conversation.
Andrew, you've just got back from Rivne. Can you tell us what you were doing there? What did you see?
So, I was out in Rivne for the first intra-war Ukrainian Cup final. The very first since, obviously, the full-scale invasion began, because for the past 2 years, the Ukrainian Association of Football have decided to skip the showcase footballing event. And this time round, it was the chance for Shakhtar or Vorskla to try and win that silverware for the first time since 2021.
And when you say the first cup final, is this the sort of Ukrainian FA Cup? So every single team enters. And what's the competition look like? What kind of challenges have the teams had to overcome to get this on the road, to get this working?
Yeah, absolutely. So over the past couple of years, the reason that the tournament has actually been cancelled, per se, is because that it was going to be adding a lot more fixtures into the calendar, and playing the league system is difficult enough with air raid delays, with travel to different areas of the country, and certain teams even playing near the front line actively. And as a result, it came that this year that the cup would return, try and slowly ease back into the normality of things, as normal as you can obviously do that during an active war. And yeah, this time round, the cup final was called a game of gratitude, and there was a very heavy focus on the military and the defence organisations of Ukraine. So prior to kick-off, there were loads of flags of all of the different Ministry of Defence, Ministry of Interior, Police, Border Guards, the Ukrainian Armed Forces, the HUR, and plenty of others that came out. You could say like the Champions League ball before kickoffs. That was instead a different flag of those respective military departments. And similarly, there were massive banners on the opposing stand from where I was that said thank you to all of those different divisions. And as a result, that was also incorporated with when games kick off in Ukraine, there's a minute silence. There's also the national anthem played, be it a cup final or not. That's every game regardless. And as well, a honorary kick-off given by an active serviceman.
A bit like a sort of first pitch in baseball for a special guest.
Exactly. So they pass it over, and then the game gets underway properly once they leave the pitch. And then obviously the managers come and congratulate them, thank them for their services. Then a different soldier was the one that actually ended up giving the trophy to the winners pre-trophy lift.
And that atmosphere of, as you said, gratitude to the armed forces and to the different ministries for the defence of the country. In my mind, I'm comparing it to what you might see in the UK when there's a minute's silence on Remembrance Day. But once that's over, the game begins, and I'm not saying that's forgotten, but the atmosphere changes. Was that the same here, or did that atmosphere continue through the match for the fans?
Well, the thing is that Shakhtar and Vorskla, they're kind of, how would you say it, not brotherly clubs, but they're quite close. Their fans have always traditionally been allies per se, whereas in Ukraine it's usually Dynamo Kyiv, Karpaty Lviv and Dnipro, the former club. They were one group where the particular fans and ultras etc. were particularly friendly, and then on top of that you've got Shakhtar, Chornomorets from Odessa and Vorskla in Poltava that were all close themselves, and as a result this was kind of a game between two friends, and it was actually a replay of the 2009 final which Vorskla won. I think it was quite a shock win at the time because it was literally about a week after Shakhtar won the UEFA Cup. So there was a lot of interesting pretexts to the game from a footballing perspective. And like you say, once all of the pre-match stuff concluded, it was very much a normal game. From the extent that, there was lots of chanting, there were lots of kids in the stands in particular, I would say. Much younger demographic, because a lot of the Shakhtar Ultras and Vorskla Ultras are actually actively serving right now. There were a couple of people that I met pre-game in a bar in the middle of town that were supporting Shakhtar, and they had been previously serving or might still be serving in Azov, and they were at the game supporting them. And in the actual stands there were a number of different banners. So I think the one that's been most poignant of late, if anyone watched Eurovision, you may have seen Jerry Hale and Alyona wearing free Azov-style Defenders T-shirts that I think they might have got fined for by the EBU. But that same banner from the same sort of project was unfurled by the fans there. and plenty of other banners that commemorate some of the fallen soldiers that no longer can support their team because they were defending their country. And then after the game, once everything concluded, no spoilers here, of course, Shakhtar won 2-1. It was an alright game. I guess the event was probably better than the actual football. And then once the trophy was lifted, they went over to those fans in particular, took some photos. There was some Free Azov-style defenders banners on the pitch as well. A lot of the players on social media afterwards said thank you to the armed forces for this. And yeah, Shakhtar won the double.
Can I ask, the makeup of these teams, are they all Ukrainian players? Are there any foreign players playing at the moment? And if so, who are they and what are their stories?
So, when the full-scale invasion first began, obviously Shakhtar's foreign players in particular, and the majority of the other clubs, all left. They were given special permission by FIFA to leave, which allowed them to go on loan elsewhere. However, over the past 2 years, foreign players have returned. On the whole, I'd probably say they're foreign players that are of lesser quality, from a footballing sense, that probably could have been attracted to Ukraine in 2021 and beforehand. However, Shakhtar obviously have got the biggest budget in Ukraine. They're owned by Ukraine's richest man, Rinat Akhmetov, and as a result are able to still splash the cash, I think, incomparably to any of the other teams in the league, even Dynamo Kyiv, for example. So this window that just passed, they signed 2 Brazilians, one for, I think, 12 million euros and another for around 15 million euros. So they've still got that weight around them to attract Brazilian talent, mainly because I think they're favourites to win the league, highly likely to be playing in the Champions League, and as a result, players, particularly in Brazil, because Shakhtar's got quite a long history of Brazilians, those players want to come because they know that they can use the club as a springboard for a move to maybe a top 5 club in Europe at some stage in the future.
You mentioned there the 12 million euros for a Brazilian player. Is there any sense amongst the fans, I don't know how to put it really, but guilt that they're enjoying football, whereas their friends maybe 500 miles to the east are still on the front lines? Or is there a sort of acceptance that, that you have to let normal life continue in some sense, and it's good to celebrate these things? How do people deal with that? How do they think of that?
Well, I think it's a bit of a paradoxical situation, because there is a lot of negativity around people going to games, in particular men of serving age, per se. There's the old debate between should you be going to the football or should you be going to the recruitment office, why aren't you serving, etc. However, on the whole, a lot of those fans that I mentioned there that I met in the bar, a lot of them do a lot of volunteer work. They have got their own businesses. Some of them donate quite a lot of money, and as a result there's an understanding and continuity, and a lot of them are actually friends with people that are serving. So there's, I guess, an understandability and an acceptance that some people do this, other people fight on the front lines. From a respect of the money spent on those players, I think that was quite a big debate in the regards of why are Shakhtar spending money on such players during the war when that probably could be going to somewhere else. However, Shakhtar do, I think, spend an awful lot amount on taxes because they have to publish those publicly. They have similarly raised quite a lot of money themselves over the past few years, do regular sort of donations to their fans, to others, through charitable foundations. But on top of that, I guess the money that they've used here is probably to do with some of the sales that they've made in the recent past, like Mihajlo Mudryk, who went for around 60 million, and that could rise to 100 million at some point in the future. But it's seen more as like a business transaction rather than this money that sort of magically appeared and we've just spent it without allowing any thought into anything else. And as a result of that, from a Shakhtar perspective, for them to continue at the level they are and have been for a number of years, which means qualifying for Europe every year, in particular the Champions League, where you get around 40 million just for making the group stages, it's sort of huge, and that helps them run the club. And also, as a result of them being in the Champions League, helps them represent Ukraine from a club perspective in the biggest football club competition in the world.
Well, the cup final is over. The Euros are coming up in the next few months in Germany. Ukraine is obviously competing. When you look forward to the Euros, How do you fancy their chances? They've got quite far in international competitions before. How do you think they're approaching Germany? Do they have a chance?
I think it's going to be interesting. The group isn't the hardest in the world. So in Ukraine's group, there's Romania, Slovakia and Belgium. Belgium are the top seed, of course. However, on paper, I think that Ukraine should be getting out of that. And with the Euros, because there's 24 teams, even if you finish third, there's a chance of getting out. But realistically, Ukraine should be aiming for a top 2 finish. And the final group stage game is against Belgium. So we'll see how that goes. I think there's a lot of hope pinned on this particular generation of talent under Serhii Rebrov, the former Dynamo Kyiv and Tottenham striker. There's a hope that potentially some of this young talent, which was, I think, on average, out of the teams that have qualified for the final tournament, the youngest used in qualifying, I think around 25 years, 272 days. So lots of them now playing in Europe. Some of the top clubs in the world, Chelsea, one's playing at Arsenal, a couple playing really well at Girona in La Liga, who are over-exceeding expectations there themselves. So we'll see. Ukraine made it to the quarterfinals last time round in 2021, the COVID Euros. I think a realistic aim would be to try and match that.
I remember Andrei Shevchenko on the sidelines because they lost 4-0 to England, didn't they? And him looking absolutely distraught. But let's hope. I mean, I feel very, very conflicted about if that was a return fixture.
Well, it'll be interesting, I think, because Ukraine and England have obviously played over the past year twice. So take it to a final tournament and let's see how it goes.
I'm so excited for the Euros. Andrew Todos, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 3 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Or sign up to Dispatches, our foreign affairs newsletter, bringing stories from our award-winning foreign correspondents straight to your inbox. We also have a Ukraine Live blog on our website where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on Twitter Spaces. Just follow The Telegraph on Twitter so that you don't miss it. To our listeners on YouTube, please note that due to issues beyond our control, there is sometimes a delay between broadcast and upload. So if you want to hear Ukraine the Latest as soon as it is released, do please refer to podcast apps. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really does help others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not know we exist. As the disinformation war ramps up, we are relying on your support more than ever. You also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We do read every message. You can also contact us directly on X, formerly known as Twitter. You can find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Giles Gear, Rachel Porter. Executive producers are David Knowles and Louisa Wells.